Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Today I'm bringing my sexy voice, as you can hear it.
your deep, berry voice.
Yeah, man. I like something's with my throat. I have no other symptoms, but my voice is just kind of shot right now, and I'm not sure what's going on.
We're suspecting you're not necessarily sick, but run down.
I think so.
It's a lack of sleep. Our sleep hygiene isn't as good as it could be, but we're trying to get that handled.
That's a very easy way of saying, or a very nice way of saying, it's terrible.
Yeah.
It's horrible sleep habits.
It might be the last, that's like the final frontier for our physical health, is to make sure that our sleep is good, because we're natural night owls, and when we put the kids to bed, we want to have all of this time to ourselves. And we end up going to bed way too late. And then we get up the next morning early to start our lives. And after a while, pretty soon, like that just leads to psychosis and a deep resonant voice.
I call it going to sleep with the West Coast and arising with the East Coast.
That is our life, absolutely. And the other thing that you, the listener, will notice is that, well, you won't know this. I'm going to tell you a piece of information, and then you'll notice something after I tell you this piece of information. We are going to be traveling to Egypt, which we're pretty excited about. And we'll probably end up talking about in a future podcast when we get back from it, because I have a feeling it's going to be a magical experience. And because we're going to Egypt, that means that today is the day that we'll be recording a couple of podcasts for when we're gone. And that means that you're going to hear Joel's sexy voice for like the next 3 or 4 podcasts.
That's right. So just sit back and relax. Enjoy.
That's right. I'm just glad that it's the deep voice and not the gone voice. That would be bad.
Well, we'll see by the time we're done recording what happens.
That's true. By the final podcast in this Joel sexy sick voice series, it might just be totally gone. So we'll maybe all have to do more talking. That would be unusual.
Yeah.
That would be weird for me to do all the talking. People won't know what to do with themselves.
Or maybe I should do more talking because, I can capture this for all time, this sound that I've got going on right now.
I think that's a fantastic idea. But that said, today's topic actually starts out talking more about, it's me doing all the talking.
Yeah. So something happened at the time of this recording. Actually, yesterday something happened.
Yeah.
Somebody that you admire, somebody that has been influential in your life, someone who... we were talking about last night, someone shaped your thinking, the very way your mind is wired. And this probably isn't an obvious person most people would think about, unless you're a fan of this person or you know their work. They probably have influenced you as well, if you're listening and you know this person. So it's not obvious, I think, for people that don't know this person, but Neil Peart died this weekend at the time of this recording. And that hits you hard, like harder than I've ever seen stuff like that hit you in most cases.
I've never been sadder at the news of a celebrity death. It's like, it's the first time that something brought me to tears.
Now, for somebody that may not know who he is the drummer for the progressive rock band Rush.
Yeah.
And he was one of the world's best drummers. And he was also a lyricist. I would consider him, I'm not a huge Rush fan. I've known them through you and some other friends in the past 10 years. He seemed to be the heartbeat of the band. I maybe people would disagree with that, but from what I can tell, he had a lot of influence in the way they created music and the things they would write about and sing about.
Yeah, so he came on in the band on the second album, and I don't think that I'm alone in saying that he changed the course that the music was going to go forever. And so they are probably as well renowned as they are because of Neil Peart becoming a part of that band on the second album. And also, Rush does not hold the same significance in culture as they did when I was younger. I'm surprised actually by how much attention his death is getting. I noticed it was like on the front page of the news subreddit, and I've seen a lot of people mentioning it on Twitter. So I'm surprised. I'm pleasantly surprised that it's impacting other people, because that means that he had significance, right? He had an impact in other people's lives like he had in mine. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful that he was able to do that. And I would say that the thing that makes Rush, if you are a person who's familiar with the band, so amazing, is that all 3 of the members of the band, I think, are equally important. And I mean, that's always been one of their claims to fame, is that there's 3 people in this band and it sounds like a 5-man band. And so every person in some way is kind of quote unquote the heartbeat of the band. And that said, Neil Peart, as you mentioned, was not just their drummer, but was also their lyricist. And while he was an exceptional drummer, he usually makes most people's top 10 list of best drummers of all time.
His music sounds like a drum machine. I mean, it's just incredible the way he's got timing and the way he uses that instrument.
Yeah, their work sounded like he used drum machines. He didn't, but it sounded like it because he was a human metronome. Like, he was extraordinary. It's very digital too. But he wasn't just a phenomenal drummer, but he was their lyricist. And I would say that that's actually what was so impactful for me, was his lyrics. So I speculate that in the Myers-Briggs system that Neil Peart was an INTP. I don't usually share my opinions of celebrity types. And also on this one, even though I never got to meet him, tragically, I feel confident in saying that. And part of the reason why is because his lyrics, I mean, there was just this like NTP to NTP thing going on, right? Like, as I would listen to his lyrics, they're very clear lyrics. They aren't too abstract. They aren't intended to be just word pictures, or they're not terribly, most of the time, they're not terribly autobiographical. They're not just about the typical things that people sing about, like love and relationships and that sort of thing. There was always an exceptional depth to them, and a highly philosophical nature. And in particular, in the early work, it was just like super geeky.
It was super intuitive. Mm-hmm. I mean, some of those things we were listening to last night, kind of in remembrance, it was very intuitive, like very, almost like a Dungeons and Dragons set to song. It's like how I thought of it, like.
Yeah, that was what was so magical for me, is because I was a geeky ENTP, teenager playing role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons in the library during lunch, and then listening to Rush all the time. So, which is pretty prototypical, I think, of a geeky NTP in that time period in history. And his lyrics not only were like spoke to me with my personal interests and having a very intuitive, fantastical nature to them in early work. Like songs like Bytor and the Snow Dog and 2112 and Hemispheres and those kinds of things. But also, he would sing about reflections he had as an individual on how life works and what things mean. And there's so much of his work that crafted how I saw the world, because I was listening to the music over and over and over. I would put certain albums on loop, and I would read while listening to their work. I think I have every song's lyrics memorized up until the album Presto, and that's like, I don't know, at least 10 albums. And then a couple other albums I have fully memorized because I listen to them so often. And I would read other works. I'd be like reading fantasy and sci-fi. Again, very typically nerdy NTP stuff. But I would be reading other work and have their music on in the background. So basically, my brain was picking up Neil Peart's messaging on loop for literally years. And so since he died, I've been really thinking about what it means to have a thought leader that came through the channel of art that I just enjoyed, but also that crafted my mind. And so usually when I think of thought leaders, I think of people who are, intentional thought leaders. I think of people who write books like the Stephen Coveys or the Anthony Robbins of the world. And I think what's interesting about Neil Peart is how much of that messaging got sort of trapped inside my brain. And looking at the times when it's like little snippets of lyrics of his songs will emerge for me and help guide me through life, weirdly enough. There's a song that he wrote called Limelight, which is dealing with what it means to be a celebrity. And he was an extremely private person. He's an INTP that his goal was never to sell out. He promised his 16-year-old self he would never sell out. And so when their music took off and they became more and more in the collective unconscious, particularly they became really big in the 70s, 80s. and when they got a sense of notoriety. And then after that, it was not so much that they were huge celebrities, but that they influenced so many musicians that came after them. Like, I mean, Dave Grohl is famously a humongous Neil Peart fan. And so in the 90s, a lot of the music of the 90s was influenced by progressive rock bands like Rush. And so they never got big in like they never got big in like a Beatles way. But they got big in a significance way. Like, they influenced so many people. And so he had to deal with being, a celebrity, which was something that he just didn't really ever anticipate or have the resources for. I think particularly because he was an INTP. Again, I'm just making that assumption.
You're just typing him from afar.
I am. I'm typing him from
fun.
afar. And I'm just going to refer to him as an INTP. And anybody who disagrees with me, I guess we can battle it out on the internet later.
Who cares?
Or not.
Let's not battle it.
Or not. I'll just believe that, and you can believe whatever you want to. And also, I think as an INTP, having extroverted feeling or harmony as his 3-year-old or inferior process meant that he had all of these interactions with other people that he didn't know how to navigate through. So he wrote this song called Limelight, and one of the lyrics in it is that, and it's about being a celebrity, and one of the lyrics is, "I can't pretend this stranger is a long-awaited friend." And so it was the clumsiness of dealing with somebody approaching him, probably fanboying or fangirling, and him trying to navigate through that experience, but not being able to pretend something that isn't true. He can't pretend that this person's a long-awaited friend, right? Like, I can't pretend that we're BFFs just because you've grown up with my work.
And they're bringing all their expectations to him. Like, oh, hey, I love you. You should love me too, right? Like, I know you so well, and I know your work so well. I've got all this expectation of you. It's like, please don't put that expectation on me. I can't do it. I just can't be there.
Well, and also, we don't have intimacy the way that the person who approaches him, like his statement is that there's not intimacy here. I have created art that has created a sense of intimacy in you, probably because it's crafted certain things, but it's not. This is not a two-way street. I don't know you, right? And I have to admit, Neil Peart would have probably been one of the few people I would have fangirled all over and been nervous and made an idiot of myself in front of, because...
Which doesn't happen very often with you at all.
No. I've met quite a few celebrities, and celebrities are oftentimes interesting people. They live interesting lives. They've done interesting things. They have a perspective that other people don't have. But I'm not a fangirl style of person.
I've seen it when we met Josh Waitskin. You fangirled over Josh Waitskin a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. Because Josh Waitskin was, because I grew up with the movie that portrayed his life, and I watched it over and over and over again. And so I fangirled a little bit, but I kept my cool for the most part. Right, I was pretty cool. But man, I would not have been able to keep my cool at all around Neil Peart. And so he had these experiences, but there was also this sense of like, one of my dreams was to have a beer with him. So meeting him and fangirling all over him would probably have not led to my dream of having a beer with him. And yet I would have really wanted it to. And so that's a weird experience to have as a human being. And I'm not a celebrity by any stretch of the imagination, but there are some circles I run in where individuals have a similar experience with us. They've been listening to our podcast. They've heard me talk about my life stories. They've heard me, if you've heard every single podcast that we've ever done, that's over 300 podcasts. And that doesn't include YouTube, videos and articles I've written, and maybe times that people have seen me on stage. So there's like a little hint of this. And so there was there have been a couple moments when people have approached me that line comes up for me and gives me permission to have weirdness in that moment. Does that make sense? It's like in those moments when I know a person has an expectation of me that they're not even 100% aware of what that expectation is, and they're talking to me, I feel like I'm failing when the interaction is not always like perfectly elegant. I feel like that's a failure on my part. And then I remember that Neil Peart wrote a whole song about how weird this is. And of course, he had these interactions 1,000 times more often. I've had him like a couple times. He had them probably on a daily basis. And he still didn't know how to respond or react to it. And so I think about that. I'm like, okay, so if it's a little weird and I don't know how to navigate through this, that's fine. It's okay. This is a weird human interaction and I don't have to know. So that's just one example of something. Like, his lyrics save me at certain times. They come up and remind me that things are, it's okay to be in this situation. And the way that I'm looking at it is pretty typical of a person who's wired like me. And that's going to be all right.
That really brings this idea of things that we were impacted with. I mean, sometimes it's people we know, like our parents and stuff, things they said when we were kids that just rattle in our brains. But there's all sorts of stuff we've been feeding our minds with as humans, as people, our whole lives. Things we've read, people we've talked to, music we've heard. Music is a huge one. The lyrics of music and the way music impacts us. Little books we've read. I mean, there's fiction novels that certain things come to my mind sometimes. There's Bible verses that come to my mind, little phrases and Bible verses. When a situation happens, there's like these like little things that percolate in my consciousness that, oh yeah, and then like it comes to me at that moment. I think we all have these dormant messages of life that have been programmed in there that we pull upon. And it's one of the things I think I've always been aware of my whole life. I've been very careful to not put things in my head that I didn't want to come out later, like always. I remember going to this like haunted mansion as a kid, and they were like showing this like anti-drinking message video, and there were like these car crashes and unconscious, unconscious, these visual images of like really bad stuff happening to people that were in like bad drunk driving car accidents. I remember turning away, and somebody's like, "Why aren't you looking at this? This is important. You needed to see this." I'm like, I don't want to put all that imagery in my head because it's going to come out later some time. And I was like 16 at the time. So I think I instinctively knew that stuff was going to come out later. The things I program in are going to come out. And I think knowing that, we can put things into our minds that we want to come out later. And I'm sure you listening have had this experience. Something you've heard, something you've listened to, something you've read comes up at a key moment in your life. And that can be really powerful. And taking conscious awareness of that and programming ourselves as such, that's also really powerful. I don't think you were thinking in terms of that, though, as a teenager. You just liked this music, the lyrics resonated with you, and here they speak to you, 20, 30 years later in your life, Antonia, as you're maybe going through your life and you have that interaction, like you said, maybe at an event, a live event, where there's somebody comes up to you and they know you, they've heard you for years talking in their ear on the podcast, there's a sense of intimacy, and then that lyric comes up. And at one moment, it might remind you, okay, I know they have expectations here. I can feel okay not letting them down, not disappointing, but also just remember how they're experiencing on their side. It's like, it just gives you a sense of something, I think.
Yeah, the intent of that lyric is not to say that everybody else is being, like they're being intrusive or anything. I love it when people approach me and talk about the impact that our podcast, our work has had on them. I love that. It's more the permission to feel like it's an awkward thing on my side, like to not know how to navigate through. It's more the permission of recognizing that this is sort of human. This is not that I'm failing at some sort of social interaction, which, I mean, maybe I am, but it's human, at least for NTPs out there. So that makes me feel better. That idea of dormant messages, though, I feel like that's a really big, I don't know, that's like a really impactful thought that has been going through my head since I heard of Neil Peart's death yesterday. And particularly, those of you, if you're not a Rush fan, if you've never even heard of the band Rush, so first, I just want to make a couple caveats. Number one, if you go out and start to, if you go out and look up Rush because we're talking about it right now, you've never heard them, I'm going to give you a couple warnings.
It's an acquired taste, right?
Rush is an acquired taste like whiskey or scotch. Particularly, number one, the barrier of entry is always Geddy Lee's voice. Geddy Lee is their singer, is their lead singer. Only singer, really. Nobody else sings. Except Amy Mann sang on one of their songs as a backup. But otherwise, it's all Geddy. And his voice is hard for people to get through sometimes. Like, it's very high-pitched. He does a lot of, especially in the early days, sort of scream singing. And so a lot of times people don't like Rush because of Geddy's voice. And so I want to warn everybody about that. And then the second thing is they also are progressive rock, particularly in the 70s when they were being highly progressive. And so it's not like quote unquote usual music. This is not formulaic music that has a like a standard chorus, bridge, etc. It's very experimental. Some of their songs are like 12 minutes long. And there's, especially in the early days, they did a lot of rock operas where entire halves of the album would be one single song with like a prelude and an overture and all that stuff. So this is odd music to a lot of people. The lyrics are also not simple lyrics. They're always, as mentioned, highly philosophical and or imaginative. There's a lot of fantasy and science fiction elements, particularly in the early days.
Sounds like you're contradicting yourself from earlier. You said it wasn't super abstract.
No, when I say abstract, I mean it's not an abstract painting style of lyrics.
Not metaphor.
Right. Like when I think of abstract art, I think of the kinds of art where the person just threw something up that meant something to them. And it's the communication is not intended to be clear communication. It's intended to be It's not intended to imply or infer anything. It's intended to be interpretable. Does that make sense?
It's more emotive than it is rational or clear communication in a way.
Yeah, like there's certain art that is intended for the person viewing it to 100% interpret it on their terms. Like it can be literally anything for the viewer. And then there's other art that is intended to imply a message. And then the hope is that the person will infer what the original implication was. And Neil Peart's lyrics are very clear in their implication. Like he's trying to deliver certain messages. And it's not intended to just be interpretable in any way that you would like it to be, which actually a lot of art is. And so it has messages in it. It's communication. It's a conversation. The lyrics are, and so because of that, there's a lot of there's fantastical elements in there, but there's not highly abstract elements, if that makes sense. So the point is that if you've never heard of Rush and you go out and look them up, because we're talking about it right now, just know that it's not something that most people pick up right away. In fact, I was introduced to Rush as a teenager by my brother, who had me listen to a song called Red Barchetta in his car. And the first thing he said is just get used to the dude's voice. And also, this is a song that doesn't have a chorus. That's how he introduced it to me. And Red Barchetta is about it's kind of a dystopian future where driving has been outlawed. And this guy's uncle has a car, a red Barchetta, that he's hidden in a barn somewhere. And every once in a while, this guy goes out and breaks the law by driving this car. And it's the thrill of not just breaking the law, but doing something that we do all the time now. But he gets the thrill of driving. And the song describes the emotions the person must be feeling at the freedom of being able to drive. And yeah, no, when I first heard it, I was like, yeah, the guy's voice, I'm not sure how I feel about that. And my brother Ty said, yeah, well, just get through it and you'll probably get to a point where you like it. And that's what happened. I acclimated to Geddy Lee's voice, and then eventually I love his voice, which is quite often. But anyway, the point of all of that is if you go look them up, there's a couple barriers of entry, and I'm just giving you a warning.
By the way, think about how prophetic that song is.
I know.
It's just a matter of time before self-driving cars take over. And we'll have to outlaw individual driving for safety reasons because drivers will be too unsafe.
Yeah.
I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's inevitable that will happen.
Well, and the song itself was written in the 70s, and it was basically it was prophesying, quote unquote prophesying, but it was talking about a future 50 years ahead into the, 50 years ahead into the future. And that would be approximately the mid 2020s. And so around 2025 is when this person would be stealing the action of driving a car. And I'm like, that's approximately around the time that I think we'll probably have a lot of self-driving cars come up. It's in the next 10, 15 years. So he might have gotten a couple decades off, but I mean, he was brilliant. Anyway, so I'm going to be talking about Rush a lot because that's what I'm thinking about. But I think these principles apply in general for any time somebody or a group of somebodies creates art or creates something that strikes us personally and ends up crawling itself into our minds and creating little neural pathways that get reinforced by revisiting their art over and over. And sometimes we don't know how those things are going to impact or affect us. and then we have them later. Like I mentioned, the song Limelight gives me permission to feel awkward. But we were listening last night. I made you. I was sitting in bed, mourning the loss of Neil Peart, making Joel listen to Rush songs all night. And there's a YouTube channel that has every single Rush song with the lyrics. So you can read the lyrics as you go. And the lyrics are, in my opinion, the lyrics are one of the most important things about Rush. And we were listening to two different songs that were particularly important to me. One is called Marathon, and the other one is called Mission. Marathon is a song about what it takes to make something happen, something big. When you're on your purpose or your mission, you have this drive to make something, make a big impact in the world. But it's a marathon. It's not a quick thing. It's something that you're going to have to do over a lifetime. And it's going to be grueling, and it's going to be painful. There's a line in it that says, you can take a breather, right? If you need to, you can pull over to the side of the road and rest for a moment, but you've got to get back on the road because nobody gets a free ride. And so if you really want to make an impact in the world, it means you're going to have to see this as a marathon, and you're going to have to do the grueling labor of being on purpose. That was something that I listened to over and over and over again. And at the time that I heard that song, I was in a religion that gave me very few options. I wasn't really allowed to have a personal mission of my own. I wasn't really allowed to dream big. I had a life that was carved out for me, and there was pretty much one thing I was allowed to do for the rest of my life. But I still loved that song, and it spoke to me. So whatever neural pathways needed to be made around that song, those lyrics got infused into kind of the marrow of my bones. And I just always thought, man, if you want to make an impact in the world, it's a marathon, and you've got to push, and it's going to be grueling, and there are times you can rest, but you've got to get back on it, and nobody gets a free ride. The second song we listened to is a song called Mission, and Mission is Neil Peart's love letter to other people's marathons. It's the artists that he particularly was inspired by, the architects and the film producers and directors and the actual painters and the musicians and everybody who impacted his life. There's a set of lyrics where he says, it's cold comfort to the ones without it. It being the drive, the spark of life, the fire inside to make an impact in the world and to bring art and to express and to do something big. It's cold comfort to the ones without it, to know how they struggled, how they suffered about it. If their lives were exotic and strange, they would likely have gladly exchanged them for something a little more plain, maybe something a little more sane. We each pay a fabulous price for our visions of paradise, but a spirit with a vision is a dream with a mission. And so that lyric reminded me that the people who have a vision, the people who want to make an impact in the world, they give up something. They give up a normal life. They give up sanity oftentimes. It's grueling. I think of the Van Goghs who cut their ears off, right? And the people who had like severe alcohol issues like Edgar Allan Poe. Like there's a lot of
Jack Kerouac.
Yeah, like the Jack Kerouac, exactly. Like the people who just had so many challenges. A part of it is because they had a fire inside of themselves to make something big happen, and it took so much of their emotional and psychological real estate. And if they had baggage coming along with it, or part of the need to express is to get through some serious traumas from the past, or maybe they just had mental health issues, all of that, it meant that they sacrificed a normal life in order to pursue their mission. And when I think about myself, fortunately, I mean, one of the reasons why you and I chose the direction we did is this is our impact. This is our art. This is the expression we want to do. And we chose personal development because we feel like that helps us address some of that baggage, right? It addresses the traumas and it helps us work through them, and we get to work through them and have a little bit more sanity in all of this, while at the same time being able to do spoken word art, which is how we see the podcast. And at the same time, we don't get to live a normal life. We've chosen not to live a normal life. And part of that is, there's family members that we have that have rejected us. They reject our way of life. We don't get to really connect with very many people. We're lonelier as humans because a lot of people can't really understand our lifestyle, and we don't gel with their lifestyle as well anymore either. There's things that we give up. We each pay a fabulous price for our visions of paradise. And the fabulous price for us is that we are no longer a part of, quote unquote, the normal templatized life. And there's so much safety in a templatized life. There's so much familiarity. There's comfort there that we just don't get to have anymore. And I think that the idea of the dormant message was that got imbued into me when I was a teenager. I knew that was what was going to be required of me if I really wanted to do something big. And then the religion that I was raised in at the time that I was listening to Rush, there was nothing but the template. So I believed those things, and then I ignored and rejected them for the lifestyle I was living. Does that make sense? Like, I had to compartmentalize those messages that had become so much a part of how I thought. I had to push them to the side. And then when I left the religion of my youth, and the world was my oyster, and I could literally go in any direction, the direction I chose to go in was one that was entrepreneurial. It was one that was nothing but risk-taking. I remember when friends of mine left at approximately the same time or a little earlier, a lot of them immediately went to college. They got the degrees that they never got to have before. And I could have done that. I thought about that. That was something that was a direction I could have gone. And I chose not to. I chose to go probably the kind of the craziest, silliest, stupidest direction that was maybe in front of me. I ended up in an incubator for entrepreneurs, and I lived with a whole bunch of people, and we were just trying to make all of this happen. And I went a direction that was more focused on impact, knowing that it was a marathon, and I was in it for the long haul. And that if I was actually going to make impact in the world, it meant that I was going to have to sacrifice a normal life. I was going to have to sacrifice the template, and I was going to have to just grind it out. And I never really thought about it until recently, but that was a gift that Neil Peart had given me when I was a teenager that lay dormant for decades. And then when I needed it, it was there for me. It was just a way that I thought about life. And 10 years later, I have the benefit of the life that I have now because Neil Peart planted a seed of an idea of how reality works inside of me. And now I'm manifesting it. So he's not just an artist whose music I liked. He was a thought leader that crafted how I experience reality. And I can, in part, credit his work with why I live the life that I live right now.
I think that's something that I think a lot about. I mean, I mentioned that earlier about the things that I had an instinct for not putting into my mind as a young person. And I think this happens to all of us so much that my question when you say that is, what am I allowing in right now that's going to sit dormant? In the good or the bad, in the helpful or the hurtful, for some future date when it's going to surface. You got lucky. I don't think you did that on purpose. You didn't seek out Rush or Neil Peart's lyrics on purpose. You got lucky. Now, there's other things rattling in your head that also lay dormant that you have a hard time getting rid of, like bad messaging, disempowering messaging. And the one thing I've been thinking a lot about right now is like in our current social zeitgeist and stuff, there's a lot of like hostility and a lot of messaging and a lot of like name calling and labeling and tribalism and all this stuff. And I'm realizing, oh my gosh, I'm letting some of this messaging seep into me that might come out later. I need to get a hold of this and cut this off now before it gets in there and it can mess with me later and disempower me later. And I need to be focused on messaging that does empower me and helps me in the future, and I'm more conscious of it now so I can take more control of it. And I think you got really fortunate or lucky, at least in this particular instance, that you had a musical influence that was positive. It wasn't a negative musical influence in you. When I think about some of the things that have influenced me from the past, it's less articulate. I mean, like I said, there's like messages like little Bible verses. Like if I try to talk to my family about like typology or personal growth sometimes, and they're not really interested, that Bible verse of, a prophet is about honor in their own hometown kind of Bible verse comes to me and I'm like, oh, okay, don't worry about it too much. It's like, it gives me comfort. because I can just remember that like little phrase or saying.
Biblical messages are surprisingly helpful. I'm always surprised by how many little gems of just general universal wisdom are actually found in the Bible.
Well, it was written down for a reason, right?
Yeah, and it's beloved for a reason, and it's the most popular book on the planet for a reason. So, yeah there's a lot of little truthisms in the Bible that come up and are super helpful.
I think one of the things, though, is the way people do stuff comes to me more, or the how they thought about things. Like in our company, for example, as we're building products and services and live events, like one of the people that's impacted my life, I never got to meet him. He passed away, was Steve Jobs. And I've studied his life and I've looked at his life, and I'd say another one is Walt Disney. But in Steve Jobs' instance, inside of the early Macintosh computers, he insisted that his engineers solder the equipment inside the computers that no one would ever see unless they tore the machine apart in straight lines. And he also had people sign the inside of the computers, like to put their work of art on it. And the way he thought about that, I always think in terms of not taking shortcuts. That I kind of have a little phrase in my head. He didn't say this phrase like solder straight lines. But when we're building stuff or doing something in our company or in my life, I think in terms of solder straight lines. Even if no one will see this, I know. And if I do it on the stuff people don't see, it's going to come out on the stuff people do see. And that's in everything. The way I think, the way I act, the way I do stuff. And so that's like a message that got in there, early on when I was reading about him when I was a young man, that comes out for me in my daily life or my business life a lot.
Yeah, as a person who uses introverted feeling or authenticity, I think that because that function tends to be so much more about embodiment, I think that modeling how other people do things is very impactful for people who are TJs and FPs. Like TJs and FPs all use introverted feeling somewhere in their car or their function stack. And I think that modeling or embodying these messages, these sort of the modality of how people go about things, I think is really big.
And I'm sure lyrics matter to us as well, TJs, FPs. But I have noticed that introverted thinking, extroverted feeling users tend to really like language and, who are all the grammar Nazis in the world? They're the INFJs, right? Or the ISFJs. All the IFJs are the grammar Nazis. Sorry, IFJs, but you know it about yourselves. The spelling Nazis, the grammar Nazis. It's that word play. It's the love of language and precision with words and things, I think really speaks to that polarity. And I think it is more about the impact about doing something for my polarity, which is introverted feeling, extroverted thinking. So I think there's a lot of, I'm sure they're not coming to my mind readily of things that have been said, but it's also just ways of doing stuff. And the philosophies of how to make an impact come up for me of things I, wired my mind. There's lyrics from certain bands and things that I listened to when I was younger, but I never listened to music for the words. Like only in the last few years, actually, since I've gotten to know you, I've paid more attention to lyrics. I almost just ignored them. It was about the kinesthetic feeling of the music itself. It was the hooks. It was the way the music swelled in me and emotionally impacted me and put me into emotional states. That's what music really did for me. I don't think I would have liked Rush as a teenager because it didn't have, the music isn't very melodical. Is that the right way of saying that word?
Melodic, yeah.
Yeah, melodic. It doesn't have a lot of melody that hooks you in. Some of it does, but it really is about the lyrics.
And the rhythm.
And the cadence, the way that's all said and articulated.
Interesting timing structures and things that are very experimental.
Absolutely. And I think, I like it. I think I'll learn to like it over time more and more. And I think we're all different. Some of us pay more attention to words. Some of us pay more attention to the way we do stuff. And so that's what those dormant messages for me come up in that way.
I think what's interesting about this situation for me is that somebody else who I mention a lot on the podcast, or at least I especially did in early days, was Robert Anton Wilson, who was a writer. And I was introduced to Robert Anton Wilson's work around the time he died. I believe I probably picked up his book Prometheus Rising the year he died. So I never knew him as somebody who was alive. So I didn't really grieve his death. By the time he was a very influential thought mentor for me, I had always experienced him as never having been alive. This is the first time that somebody was a thought leader for me that I'm grieving they're passing. Like they're no longer, their light is no longer in the world. And I grew up with it being in the world. And because this is impacting me so much, I don't think I realized, I've always realized how important mentors are. Like mentors are very important. People who craft and shape your thoughts, whether or not it's doing through articulation or whether or not it's doing through an embodied experience, regardless of how they're impacting the way that you see reality. I think I'm getting a very visceral experience of just how important these people are in our lives. And you mentioned before this idea of being careful with what you put into your mind. It makes me think of that, that sort of apocryphal story of the wolf you feed, right? Like you have a dark wolf and a light wolf, and one of them it just wants negativity and annihilation, and the other one wants light and creativity. And which one will win? A young person is talking to their mentor and says, which one of these parts of who I am, this dark wolf or this light wolf, which one will win? And he says, it's the one you feed. And so I think it's important to feed the parts of us that we want, like the part of us that we want to be the biggest influence in who we are. That's what we have to feed. And these mentors and thought leaders are part of the food that we're feeding these parts of who we are. Like this is the food that we're nourishing ourselves on. And so these people become really important. They're part of what crafts us to become better human beings. And it's easy to diminish their impact. And I think, as in like, these are the people I like to follow. I think when we find somebody who has highly calibrated thought and the kinds of thoughts that we want to be feeding those parts of ourselves on, I don't think there's anything wrong with following those people, like following them for a time and recognizing and acknowledging how much they've impacted us, how much of who we are can be attributed to the influence that these people had in our lives. But then I think the next level down, or the next sort of mile marker, is recognizing how much we can be those people for others. We don't just have to be somebody who benefits from the careful, curated thoughts of others or the careful, curated lives of others. We can be the people who have those impacts on another generation beyond. We can be the people who are putting out the information and content and data. And I don't know if we always see ourselves as that, but I think in particular in the modern world, you were talking about the modern world encouraging us to think so many different things and having sort of a zeitgeist right now that is really one of hostility and agitation. And we are feeding into that or not feeding into it. Most of us have some sort of social media presence. Now, if you listening have absolutely zero social media presence, then your opportunities for impact are happening more personally. And I actually think that that's positive. I think that's good. But most of us, like half the planet is on Facebook. Most of us have some sort of social media presence. And being careful about what we put out into the world, being careful how we communicate with other people, the ideas that we present, how we give push back to others or how we attempt to persuade, or the content we curate in behalf of other people. This is all potentially food for other people's minds, right? Because they're feeding off of the ideas and thoughts that other people are presenting, just like we're feeding off of the ideas that other people are presenting for ourselves. And recognizing that the higher quality output we have is a reflection of the high quality input we have. So as I right now am feeling a sense of loss, but also deep gratitude, just gratitude for how this person just really planted some imperative thoughts in my mind and really crafted who I've become. Like this person who really, it's like I'm crying right now and it's kind of stupid. Neil Peart, the drummer of Rush, died and I'm like crying about it. And it's like, that's weird to me. It's weird that I'm so impacted by it. But because of how careful he was with the lyrics he put out, how much time and effort clearly went into this, it makes me want to be a better outputter of thoughts as well. I recently received some feedback for one of the podcasts that we did that indicated that we were being that we were not really in a position to say the things that we were saying. So I really reevaluated the podcast that we had put out, and like, am I taking liberties by making the statements that I'm making? And I realized, no, I don't think so. I think that we are so careful with what we say. We're so careful with what we output for the most part. There have been time periods in the past where I have had less care. But these days I feel like I have a responsibility to be careful. So when I say things, they're not cavalier. But I think we're in a time period of people just vomiting things out. They are not careful at all. Most people do not show that level of care. And I believe that because of people like Neil Peart, I am taking so much more care of the messages I put out into the world. And so I feel like if I could maybe encapsulate what has basically become a memoriam for Neil Peart in this podcast, if I could encapsulate it, I think it's a beseeching of every person who might get access to this podcast to recognize how careful thought and influence to others, how much good it can do, how much positive influence that we can have on other people if we are willing to pause and really reevaluate the things that we're about to say. There was something somebody said on Twitter not that long ago that triggered me and pissed me off, and I was about to like tweet back and make this like snarky statement, and I paused and just hovered my thumb over the, enter, and then just went, you know what? I don't think this is good juju. I don't think this is the energy I want to put out into the world. So I hit discard. And I think I've done that probably 20 times in the last month. Just, you know what? I don't think this is the one I want to put out. I don't think that this is what I want to represent. This is not the energy that I would like to be fostering in the world. And I think that, I think that if I could sort of kick the can of a message further down the road to somebody else, I think it's to be careful, to be really careful about the things we say, and recognize that we are food for others, and we want to be nutrient dense food. We want to be highly nutritious for other people's minds. And that's coming from somebody who uses introverted thinking. Joel, you mentioned using introverted feeling. As somebody who uses introverted feeling or authenticity, you're more modeling other people's lives. And so that even increases the stakes even higher, because then it's about living a careful life at that point. It's about curating your life, not just your thoughts and your speech, but everything that you're doing. Not to feel a sense of like you're trapped by other people's judgment, but rather that you are doing a service by modeling the high quality life that a person could be living. And I think that these are important thoughts. I think that these are important things to think about, is the influence we have on other people. Not the fear of judgment back, but the idea that we can be such a force for good if we're just willing to pause and think things through and really recognize how much impact we have on other people.
Right now, I'm realizing just how much conversation is happening, how much articulated content is being put out in the world. And it seems like everybody's trying to one-up each other a lot of times. Like, I'm going to say the most awesome thing. And I mean, we do an articulate art form. We said this on a few podcasts ago. This is an articulate art form, podcasting. And I'm realizing there's probably a lot of power right now in not doing a lot of talking, in not creating a lot of articulate thought, unless it's really like on message or trying to say something. Just talking for its own sake. I'm realizing for myself, and this is just a personal thing, talking for its own sake is just more noise. It's not actually contributing. It's just trying to throw my hat in the ring. Like, I'm here too. And I found myself doing that on social media a lot, like just posting to feel, because I feel like I want to be a part of something, or just to post to be entered into the conversations that are happening in the world, right? Feel alive or feel valid or feel recognized or something. And I'm trying to say things that are more meaningful, at least to me, going forward, and being more careful, not posting as much, but when I post, try to actually have a message, something I want to say. And I think this is something we could be thinking about, is in a world filled with just tons of noise, less is more often. Less articulation might be what the world needs right now, because everybody thinks they have a valid perspective and voice right now. And I would argue most people don't, quite frankly. I mean, again, that's my personal opinion, but most people don't really have much to say. They're just saying a bunch of crap. And they're usually repeating something they heard, and they're augmenting a message. It's very few people who create new ways of thinking or new messaging. And again, my mantra has been demonstrate, don't articulate. Demonstrate, don't articulate. And this is with everything in my life, with myself. Hey, I'm going to get in shape this year. I'm going to really do it. And words of affirmation can be powerful. And am I taking the actions to do that? The demonstration of it. Is that what I'm doing? Because that's really what it's about. It's the articulation is just words. The demonstration is the powerful thing. And I think they can be in tandem. I think words can help us. But even with my kids, like what I do is going to speak much louder to them than what I say to them. How I live my life is going to demonstrate to them how I want them to live their lives or what I want them to model. And that includes the words I use. That includes the articulation I bring out. And again, I'm a feeler perceiver. I'm an ENFP. So I think of this on this side of the coin, right? Articulation is powerful for me, but demonstration so much more powerful because it's about that impact. So I think as you're listening and you're kind of matching your personality type to some of the things we're talking about, you're going to find yourself probably leaning more toward one or the other based on how you're wired. And I think we can learn from both. I've learned a lot from articulation. I do it as a profession now, so it's something that I enjoy doing, and I think it's powerful. And I'm realizing that, like, for example, we get comments under like YouTube videos or something like that. Instead of trying to like articulate and correct, well, you didn't get it right because of this and that, and like battle it out in the comment fields, I realized, you know what? I'm going to go create the next thing. I'm going to go demonstrate and put out the next great thing that I want to say at the top level, a new podcast, a new video, a new article, a new something. That's how I'll speak rather than trying to argue at a lower level. And I would encourage you to do that too, whether you're an articulate person or whether you're a demonstrative person or maybe a blend of both. Instead of trying to have arguments at the comment level, quote unquote, metaphorically speaking, what could you do to put something out at the top level? What could you create? I think I said this like 2 podcasts ago, maybe last podcast. I don't remember. But this is something I've been really thinking a lot about, is how can Neil Peart didn't get on and argue with people in comments. He didn't go on underneath Rush songs. Of course, when he was really big, when Rush was huge, this wasn't even available. But it wasn't like a comment war and defending his work. They would create another album. That's just what you do as a musician or artist. So what is your music? What is your art? What is your articulation? What is your demonstration? What is it that you do? What is it that you bring to the world? And don't tell me it's leaving YouTube comments and correcting people that are wrong on the internet. That's not art. That's not doing anything for anybody. No one cares about that. It can be somewhat valid, but what is it that you actually bring to the world? Top level, like from you, from your person. What is your statement? What is your art? What is your expression? What is your message to the world? And that's the top level thing. And let other people argue about it underneath it. What's the top level thing you're bringing? I think that's what I take from this. Is great creators, they think in top level. They don't think in commenting and arguing and disagreeing at the lower levels. They just create, let other people disagree with it or agree with it, and chips fall where they may, and then they create again, and then they create again. They express and create. And that's my encouragement to you listening today.
Yeah, and maybe 20, 30 years from now, there'll be a little Antonia Dodge crying about your death on a podcast because you impacted them so much.
Right?
Yeah. So I agree with you. We got to walk the walk while we're talking the talk.
So what's your perspective? You've been listening with us. You haven't had a microphone. Now's your chance to come and make your voice heard in the comment field under the top level. As I just said, don't make comments. I think comments are fine. I think you understand. Hopefully, you're listening to this podcast. You're very smart, obviously, and very intelligent and very intuitive, most likely. Even if you're a sensor, you still have an intuitive mind about you. Come over, leave a comment, ask a question, share your viewpoint, share your story about what's coming up for you. And we can have a conversation about this. Not an argument, not a disagreement, but a conversation about understanding some of these principles of what we're talking about today. So come over to personalityhacker.com, leave a comment, ask a question, and share your story there underneath this show.
Yeah, and if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. Have you left a rating and review on iTunes for us? If you're using iTunes, have you left a rating and review? If you haven't, why not? Like, if you listen to us every week and you like us, go do it, please, for me, right? So I can go read them, because that's my nourishment. That's what feeds me. And then I know that we're doing a good job, and it encourages me to keep going. So go leave us a rating and review on iTunes. When I say that helps us out a lot, I don't just mean like in the charts. We're not even looking at charts anymore. In the early days, we used to go look at charts all the time. We're like, oh my gosh, we're number 34 in health, and that was a big deal. And now we don't even look at them. But I look at the reviews because that gives me food to keep going. So go do that. And also, our book, Personality Hacker, is out. It's been out for a while. You should go read it. And you can get that at all major book retailers, particularly online. You can also leave us a rating review for the book on Amazon and on Goodreads. And again, that also helps us out a lot. We don't look at the rankings anymore. We don't even care about that stuff. But when we read the reviews, it gives us a little warm, fuzzy feeling in our hearts. So
it's a boost, man.
It is a boost.
Helps you keep going, right?
That's right. So that also helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.